man today? No. Because I'm gonna get him!
This is a Hagman and Hagman report for this Friday. This is January 24th, 2014. It's a live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagman, co-host, along with my son, Joe Hagman. Together, we are the Hagman and Hagman Report, folks. We've got a fantastic show for you tonight. Two very special guests, brothers in arms, in the trenches, Mr. Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com, and the guerrilla economist, otherwise known as V, the guerrilla economist, roguemoney.net. Folks, you're about to hear the cleanup, the wrap-up, the janitorial issue, I suppose, of broadcasts in the past. Two gentlemen who have laid it all out for you in the past. It seems like now things are coming to fruition. We had just a heck of a market dump today. The U.S. stocks fell sharply today. Dow Jones Industrial Averaging tumbling triple digits for a second session and posting its worst week since November of 2011. Investors pulled money from emerging markets and other assets viewed as risky. We knew today was coming. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief, your trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. For those new to the program, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base on the internet is HomelandSecurityUS.com. We have also, we simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network there at the Hagman and HagmanReport.com. Our two guests tonight, of course, were always linked to their websites, stevequayle.com and roguemoney.net. That's roguemoney.net for V, the Guerrilla Economist, and Steve Quayle, respectively. Just want to mention this. Folks, the portions of today's broadcast are sponsored by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, you go to www.audibletrial.com/CFP radio, or very simply, go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, click on the link to Audible Trial or to Audible.com. There you'll find thousands, tens of thousands, actually 150,000 titles available for you to listen to. And when you do that through our program, you can get a free audiobook and 30-day trial just by signing up via our link. With that, Joe, welcome to tonight's program. We've got a fantastic show planned. Yes. It couldn't be better timed.
No, it couldn't be better timed. We saw 175.99 loss on the Dow yesterday. Today, it was up there around 300 and some, about 500 total day. And the 2-day loss, and it's a Friday, so we're not going to see what's going to happen with this 2-day break. There were some rumors about China dumping treasuries and some hacking in CNN newsroom yesterday. The article got posted up there, and a lot of other financial things going on. J.P. Morgan had the biggest day of removal of gold, and with that, I'm going to bring Steve on. Steve, welcome to the Hagman and Hagman Report.
Well, good night, good evening, and let's get going because, again, Joe, you just nailed some of the biggest stories that have happened in the financial world, especially the J.P. Morgan vaults being emptied of a lot of gold, the second largest in history. What's interesting is that I think I've said it before on the show with you guys on Hagman and Hagman, gold always moves from weak hands to strong arms. And it's nobody's, how should I say this? No one should be in the dark at what is taking place in China. I'm suspecting right now that as the CNN article that was posted, we were doing the show the other night at the close of a show with Sheila Zielinski, Doug, and that article posted, and then they claimed it was an attack. Well, let me tell you something. Attacks like that don't just happen. Number one, that was an Illuminati message that China was dumping all their commercial paper. Number two, that they had closed the Sea of Japan or Sea of China, South China Sea, and those things are, how should we say this, more than faux pas. They're more than just, a glitch or a cyber attack. Those are severe messages. Now today, Ambrose Evans Pritchard of The Telegraph basically said Japan-China war of words goes ballistic in Davos. And one of the problems with American school systems is they have robbed the young people who are now getting to be the leaders of this country of they've robbed them totally of any reality-based history. In other words, they don't know the history of World War II, World War I, or the coming World War III. And what we're facing right now is a global economic meltdown. We're facing the fact that Japan is printing money with reckless abandon. They don't even care. The United States printing money with reckless abandon. They don't even care. The Chinese have taken all those dollars that they've gained by selling the West all their cheap goods. And when I say cheap, cheaper than it would cost to manufacture most things domestically. And they've taken the paper money, and now they're buying real stuff. One of the questions I get asked all the time, should I pay off my mortgage or should I basically use the money to continue my debt service and buy items I'm going to need? The answer that I will always give is the same. You probably don't know who owns your mortgage. So therefore, paying it off won't even guarantee that you get clear title. Well, they said I'll get clear title. Yeah, they say that. But when the holder of last resort moves, and we've had case after case after case throughout the country, I mean, thousands of cases where people thought they had paid off their mortgage only to find out that it had been sold to another party and the original party never paid off the ultimate holder of last record. So we're talking tonight about World War III. I know V is he on now?
Yes, V is with us.
Doug?
V is with us.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, Joe. Yeah, I think we better get right into the matter of what the topic is tonight because, again, we've just had a very severe alert warning over the Super Bowl. We're seeing false flags. We're hearing about the poisoning, a, quote, exercise to poison the food in February after the Super Bowl. That's what Doug had warned everybody he's concerned for that period after the Super Bowl. But I think what V will lay out, and I'll go silent, V, until you want to hand it back, but you need to understand what's at play here. The death of the dollar, the petrodollar, when America's dollar dies, so does our place in the world. So we're going to fight like mad. We're going to stir up as much revolution in the Ukraine as we can. We're going to stir the stuff. And one guy, Doug, and I'll put this politely, sent me an email, publisher, saying, the stuff has hit the fan. He said it's time to duck and dig in. And you know the publisher, but I'm not at liberty to tell him. Very well known. So the point is that we're on the verge of World War III. The economic collapse, and even in normal times when gold would sell off, when the stock market would sell off 300 points, we should have seen gold go down. It didn't, and that's what put a kibosh or put a break to the idea of selling gold short. There's a huge gold short out there, meaning people are betting it's going to go down. My guess is China and India are calling the United States and the manipulators bluff, and I think it's only going to get worse. So I'm going to turn it over to V, and V, lay this out so people can understand that if ever you and I have been on a show at any time and period, tonight is most perilous that we've ever done a show together in light of the breaking news. Go ahead.
Amen, absolutely. This is probably going to be the most important show that we have ever did. And I don't take that lightly. You know, over the past, I believe in June of 2012, I remember writing an article and giving it over to Steve. And I think that was one of our first communiques. And I put it out there saying that the euro was an unofficially collapsed currency. And you see the over almost 2 years later how that's being played out because the currency is dead. Folks, the dollar is unofficially, it's dead. It's worthless, okay? And what we're seeing right now is so critical. It's so important because the things that are transpiring is the absolute full onslaught and bombardment by the Anglo-American banking system in order to maintain the petrodollar supremacy. Now, today, I had a very, very important contact, a very important source that I was communicating with. The gentleman is my mentor, the man who has taken me under his wings, showing me the ropes. And when I have to say highest level source, folks, I'm talking about a gentleman who goes to the Senate and tells these guys what to do. That's how powerful and influential this gentleman is. He's well in age now. I mean, when this guy was in his prime, he retired at 33 or 34 years of age. Top player. And in no uncertain terms, because I was seeing so many things occur over the course of the last year or so of 2013, following the events, and then up, especially past the fall, past the whole Syria debacle on September 23rd, where the U.S. went packing. And I said to him, you know, I see a lot of this pattern here, and is what I'm seeing correct? And he looked at me, and he said in no uncertain terms, as very seriously, very sternly, he said, we're going to go to war. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? I know we're going to go to war, but how bad? What are we going after? And folks, what they're doing right now, because of what the Chinese, the Indians, the Russians, many countries in the East have done in grabbing hard assets, in getting away from the paper market, getting away from the manipulation of the West. What they've done is really expose the banksters' weakness. And what the gentleman told me, he said, V, we're not going to let this go. He said, do you think for 1 second we're going to let the Chinese and the Russians have their way with us? Do you think for 1 second the country that we've built up, and he was referring to China, that we've built up, we're going to allow that dog to bite our hand? No, it's full-on war, V. And we're going to see exactly how this as this thing plays out. And I was absolutely floored. And what we've discussed and what he showed me is what I've known, what I've been following for the last year or so. Folks, the encirclement that's been going on in Russia, you've seen over the past decade the various color revolutions from Georgia, Serbia, Lithuania, and now the latest one in the Ukraine. All these CIA-backed and non-governmental organization revolutions that are overthrowing governments, overthrowing anything that is not pro-Western, that is not pro-American, pro-Anglo-American, pro-Euro, is being overthrown. It is also the reason why, if you remember in 2010, Poland's president and 96 members of his cabinet and top military officials were blown out of the sky. What's his crime? He was cozying up to the Russians. This is the issue, folks. You see the encirclement, and I'm going to talk about it later in the show, of what's happening with China. Why is China all of a sudden getting so very bellicose? You know, oftentimes you hear on the news, oh, China says, prepare for war. And you're wondering, well, what the heck did we do to make China think that? I'm going to describe to you in detail what we're doing. And this is going to be interesting because the power play that the East was doing, especially Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa, was to create the BRICS Bank. And the BRICS Bank only exists on paper. It hasn't been come to fruition yet. And the threat of a gold-backed trade note, that is a threat to the SDR and what the West wants to play. And we're going to see how there's going to be a total clash that's going to bring about a much larger war. And it doesn't look good. Steve, you want to add?
Well, I think that it's obvious that all war is nothing more than an economic policy of haves wanting to maintain what they have or coveting what their neighbor has, whether it's energy, minerals, whatever. Now, it's important, too, I think, that people understand tonight, Doug and Joe, that I used to make this statement, I think I can even maybe attenuate a little bit. You watch the war of words heating up, And when you start to see the emotions basically get to a certain point, in other words, building to a crescendo, you know that there's going to be a test of somebody's will. We've obviously seen the overflights of the Chinese challenging the Japanese, the U.S. being in effect challenged. But we've got more going on here behind the scenes that most people don't understand. And that's simply this, that the elite, and I want to drive this point home, and the Illuminati, they want global war. In other words, the power brokers aren't looking at preventing it. The power brokers are initiating it. And V, is it correct to say that's what your high-ranking friend, your mentor, was telling you? If you think, when he said if you think, that sounds to me like a statement, we're not going to let him get away with it. Is that a correct statement?
Absolutely. You know, he said in a very demeaning, racial kind of way. He said, do you think those bleepity bleep, and didn't use a skin color of yellow, we're going to let them get away with it? And that's the thing, is they're not going to let them get away with it, not without a fight. Folks, the banksters did not spend over 500 years, and especially in the last 200 years, to get to where they are right now, only to have it, slip out of their fingertips. They did not work this hard to allow this to occur. And they're doing everything they can to cause tension within and without the borders of Russia, within and without the borders of China. They are paying off people within the Russians, within the Russian government, within the Chinese government, those that are willing to backstab and sell out their countries. There are serious things that are occurring. The credit bubbles that are being created in China, both in its banking system as well as the massive amount of leveraged debt that's in the shadow banking system. The fact that, me and Steve kind of brushed upon that there was a report when me and him were talking earlier in the week that, the Chinese park about $4 trillion in the Chinese the political class, the top echelon political class, they've talked about $4 trillion in the Caribbean. The actual numbers are actually estimated to be between 7.5 and 8.3 trillion. Those are the actual numbers. So you got to understand, they allowed a considerable bubble to be blown in order for them to extract that type of wealth. All right, this has gone absolutely bonkers. They're taking the BRICS apart. Okay, look at Brazil, all sorts of banking issues, and I'm going to get into that later. Okay, look at Russia, all sorts of proxy operations that are occurring within Russia with the Chechens, with the various color revolutions on its border, with various quote-unquote democracy movements that are fomented using using American NGOs within Russia. Japan is going to be a very key player in this. Japan is being used as an errand boy, as a gopher boy, to foment war with the Chinese, and then at the same time splinter India away from the BRICS. South Africa, years ago, had a convenient mining collapse occur out of nowhere. And then recently we've heard about all the labor disputes that are occurring in South Africa, where you have labor unions saying, hey, we don't want a 10% or 20%. No, we want a 65, 70% raise in our pay, causing the mines to shut down and go into what's called maintenance and care. Okay? These are the things that are happening. These are the massive amounts of proxy operations done by the multinational banks and the banksters, the powers that be, that are pulling the strings. It is right now a full court press, and it's only short of a full-blown conflict. And like what Steve said, this is a time of tension. This is a testing of wills, and all it takes is for the wrong person to do the wrong thing at the wrong time, and we will be in it like you would not believe. We will be in the absolute thick of World War III, and I have no doubt about that.
That's incredible, V. I just got a question for you here. I've been hearing now, after the news of the stocks, particularly the stock market, the Dow Jones,
Yep.
people saying, Hey, it's only 2% drop. Take a chill pill. That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah, it's basically whatever the gains that the Dow has gotten from the taper rally when the Fed said we're going to taper and the stock market goes up. They just erased that. Number one. Number two, the drop also helps the treasuries. Okay, we've seen about, and I've said this so many times, folks. Once we get into the 3 percentile range, it gets very critical. Okay, and it gets very expensive for the banksters to leverage their loans. So we've gotten close to the 3% range about a couple weeks ago, about a month ago. And to prevent that from happening, a sell-off in stocks automatically created a rally in the bond market. So they're doing whatever they can to hedge the petrodollar. It is not coincidence you see a treasury rally when you look at all the world events that are occurring right now, that and all these world events have to do with the survival of the petrodollar. It's not a coincidence. It is, in fact, an orchestrated, cleverly devised strategy. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of a loss. And the last program that I was on, not the last one, but a couple programs ago, I said they're going to let the Dow go to 16,000 points. I've written about it. And sure enough, look where we are, folks. Almost a year later, and the Dow's at 16,000 points. And one of the things I said, they're going to let it go to 16,000, and they're going to let it drop a little bit in order to provide the buffer that the bond market needs. So that drop is siphoning the losses and putting it right into the bond market to keep that bond market inflated and keep it going. Because you've got to remember, that bond market is twice as large, almost 2.5 times as large as the stock market. And that's imperative. That's where this whole thing goes. And that's why Japan is critical as well. And we're going to get into that later tonight as well. But if there's anything you want to add, Doug, by all means.
No, I'll turn it back to Steve.
I think that Doug.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, and sometimes there's a delay, and I apologize. I don't mean to talk over anyone. One of the things that most people do not understand is the way high-frequency trading works. You're not trading against a free market. You're trading against a controlled market. You're dealing with computers that can see both sides of the trade before anybody reads them on the big boards and the brokerage firms or whatever. That's how, obviously, Goldman Sachs has plundered America along with J.P. Morgan. And the thing that is important to remember is this, that at the end of the day, you can have all the paper shenanigans you want, but one of the most critical holes in the dike, if you will, of the dam, let's say in the dam, is the fact that you've got Germany wanting the repatriation of its gold. You have the Dutch. You have a lot of nations saying, "Where's our gold?" Well, what people don't understand is the United States, in conjunction with Japan, pretty much for the decade of the Bushes and the yen carry trade, there was so much gold leasing. And in fact, that you could borrow gold, you could sell the gold, use the proceeds, invest it, and you could make terrific gains. Well, so when I see the headlines that 85 people control the majority of the world's wealth, of course they do. Guess what? They're the ones that own the media. They're the ones that own all of the media. They're the ones that own the banks. And Doug, it's kind of like trying to play poker where they can see your cards and you don't even have a clue what their cards are because they just basically mint them or print them under the table to make sure you always get beat. The stock market is the most unrealistic signal or sign of the real healthy economy. I posted a story today, V, you probably saw it too, 1,500 people applying for 50 jobs. There seems to be a mind-controlled zombie effect on Americans that they don't understand. For so many years, consumer spending fueled the economy, fueled the economy, fueled the economy. Now there is no consumer spending. The middle class is wiped out, and it's wiped out. It's not in the process of being wiped out. It's done. It's over. It's finished. And so when people are saying, how can anybody get ahead? The idea is this. 10 years ago, when midway through Talk Radioville, and when I started 20 years ago, the point is, I made this statement. I said China and India will be built up economically so that they ultimately will have a middle class built. Ours will be destroyed so that the bankers can offer them credit cards and charge 2.3 billion people interest instead of 100 million. And that's exactly what's going on. And what V said is accurate. $8.3 trillion is the real number that's going into the Caribbean. And the reason it's going to the Caribbean, because even the wealthy Chinese and the billionaires, and for the record, China has more billionaires than any place else on the planet right now, is they know what's coming down. If you've got to have a giant screen TV to see the sun and you're choking on your own industrial waste, not to mention your own sewage, then the bottom line is you've got to expand out. And see, this is the basis of, and years ago, and B, this is one thing that most people couldn't receive, even when I read them excerpts on radio, and I think 10 years ago, the Chinese white papers on China's doctrine of war. I can tell you, and I could tell you, exactly how it's going to go between China and Japan. So much so, and I shared this with you, Doug, and I got to be careful, V, so I don't get the person in trouble, because he's already got problems after you and I talk. V and I were talking yesterday afternoon, and we were cut off, 3 or 4 times, V?
Yep, easily 3 to 4 times.
And and when the magic words, and by the way,
and the other thing is, we were on landlines, folks. Landlines, wired landlines.
And the thing that got us cut off and actually got my line totally disconnected, okay, now that hasn't happened in a while, is the fact that we were talking, Doug and Joe, we were talking about a certain individual that had been in contact with some of the high-ranking Chinese in the United States getting instruction in aircraft, and he flat out said, he asked them about the islands, and they said, we will take the islands, obviously the disputed islands, the Senkaku, and then the one of them got indignant and said, and we will crush the Japanese. He said something about missiles against Tokyo. Well, if everybody thinks back, it was only a week to 10 days ago, and the Chinese were openly stating that they had 1,000 missiles pointed at Tokyo. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to understand the tension historically between China and Japan. 35 million Chinese were murdered and butchered. And they were murdered and butchered, and it was beyond the rape of Nanking. It was basically genocide. Dr. Ishii, who was the head of the biological and chemical warfare for Japan, and Unit 731, Dr. Ishii, you know the word ish? Well, it just had an eye to it, was probably one of the most brutal war criminals in history, making Dr. Mengele look like a kindergarten cop, okay? And that's no kidding. And so the situation is, after the war, we took all the Japanese biological, chemical warfare specialists, and we gave them cover, gave new identities, etc. I'm not rehashing that. But to the Chinese, there is no greater contempt than the Japanese. The Chinese absolutely have spent the last 20 years building for the inevitable. They plan to take the South Pacific. They plan to take Australia. They plan to take New Zealand. They plan to take the Philippines, and Japan will be no more, and Taiwan will also be taken. Now, in order to facilitate that, some things have to happen. And as V and I were talking about this on the phone yesterday, I'm getting back to that, 4 times within 10 minutes, and the whole subject that got us cut off was the coming war between China and Japan. And it wasn't, and look, you guys, this is in real time. This is not make-believe because, oh, gee, we had a storm. We had bright blue skies in Bozeman, so there was no issues there. And it was especially cut off when we started mentioning the place they were training, which I won't do that because I don't need to give somebody any more trouble than they already got. But the point is when you've got brave men and women who are risking your life to tell you the truth, don't you think maybe you got bigger issues than watching the Super Bowl? And I want to go on record, V. I'm not a football fan. Doug, you know, and Joe, if you don't know, I have never watched a football game all the way through. Okay? I have never watched a Super Bowl. Now, why am I saying that? Because simply this. I had a friend that was one of the CIA's top men. He was basically a pretty famous guy. I'll just tell his code name. His name was Maverick. They even got a statue to him, I think, in Budapest. He spent time in Lubyanka, Russian prison in Moscow. And the thing is that when he started to tell me how the world really worked, by the way, I tried to lead him to Jesus. To my knowledge, he died and went to hell. But all I can say is I tried, and I pled with him to repent. And when you get to a certain group of individuals, they just don't have a conscience anymore. But what that man did do is give me an understanding of how things were really working during the Cold War. Saying all that, I'm telling you point blank, that every single headline you read on network or read in the papers or you see on network TV, how about the polar vortex? Who in the blazes ever heard of a polar vortex? Well, there was a reason for using that word, because a vortex, and if we have a certain friend, Doug, listening in on, the upper part of the continent, and we deal with torsion physics, you're dealing with a whole realm of physics that most people don't know exists. Oh, they can explain torsion effects. They can explain the Coriolis effect. They can explain the whirlpool galaxy and all this stuff. So how does this all play into what B and I are talking about? Very simply this. The powers that be want a total destruction of the old system. In their mind, in their methodology, in their madness, and in their demonically inspired blueprint, they must destroy the West. They must destroy what we've called modern civilization, and they must destroy, in their minds, 5.5 billion people's lives. It is still amazing to me, V, that what we're doing is trying to teach people that even that which they think is money, unless it's in physical assets or unless it's in something that's barterable, they don't have anything but basically a vapor. And this is why it's important for me. By the way, my